Hello and welcome to Season 4, Episode 30 of Logicast, the AWS News podcast brought to you by Logicata. I'm Carl Robinson, CEO and co-founder of Logicata, and I'm joined today, as always, by the new legend of karate, lead cloud engineer, John Goodall. How are you doing today, John?
You need to move on. You need to move on from this.
Well,
it's just a thing I do.
It's your new hobby. So we chat about DIY. It's going to be karate. And the reason I went with legend of karate is because last night I watched Karate Kid Legends with Jackie Chan and Ralph Macchio. So it's still at the front of my mind. If you don't want to talk about karate, that's fine. We can,
It's a thing. I tell you what, it's the sport tech conversation all over again, isn't it? My knees are still not happy with me. I have to abuse more of that company-provided physiotherapy.
Do it. Yes, if if there's pain, you should absolutely deal with that. But anyway, we're not here to talk about karate. We are joined today by special guest Peter Van Iperen, CISO at AlphaSense. How are you doing today, Peter?
I'm doing great. Not doing karate, not today.
No, you're not a martial artist in your spare time?
Yeah, not since childhood, no. But I think John is a braver man than I for taking that on in his call it waning youth, I guess.
Advanced years. Yes. Yeah. Anyway, we should move on. Let's talk about you, Peter. What is it that you do for a living? Tell us a bit about yourself, a bit about AlphaSense.
Sure. So I'm the CISO and CIO at AlphaSense, and basically that means I am in charge of securing everything at AlphaSense, as well as all enterprise-facing infrastructure and IT. For those who don't know what AlphaSense is the technology that's behind most of the business world's biggest and most important decisions. So AlphaSense is an AI-driven market intelligence, enterprise intelligence, market research, financial data search tool that kind of allows you to do smart searches and really understand the decisions you should make. Should you invest? Should you do an M&A? So it's all driven. We're mostly AWS under the hood. I've a big AWS user since it was not S3, but actually a simple storage service going all the way back in the day. And through the years, I've had a lot of involvement with AWS, including what became things like Watchtower and stuff. I was part of Project Blackbeard back in the day, getting that kind of assembled, working as on the customer side as to what that needed to look like. And so AWS is near and dear to my heart, and its security is also near and dear to my heart, and also something that could always enjoy some improvement, let's say.
Well, the only thing that's constant is change. Everything needs to be improved, whether it's security, whether it's infrastructure, anything else. And I think you mentioned contributing to, was it the CSA in
Yes.
preamble?
Yep. I do contribute to Cloud Security Alliance quite a bit, and particularly a big believer in kind of both. I think AWS has some particularly great certs, but I also think that kind of getting a vendor neutral view is important too, as having a fundamental understanding of the cloud is really important to understanding how to use it appropriately and secure it appropriately. I know, not to get off topic, I would just say, and having been such an early adopter of cloud, I am always amused by early cloud adoption by companies and some of the things that you see them do as they attempt to get into the cloud and lift and shift into the cloud, which I think is why having partners like you guys is great, because it's...
Well, you're going to have to give us an example of that now, Peter. Obviously, no names, no pack drills, but you're going to have to share an anecdote now that you've kind of dangled that carrot, I think.
I mean, I had a like 4-hour debate with a team one time about whether the Palo Alto's rules that they were going to move into the cloud should be where they should fall in the level of the security groups and the ACLs, and I'm like, nowhere, because you have the security groups and the ACLs. Why are we migrating Palo Altos into your cloud infrastructure unnecessarily? I think the other one that I has always stuck with me is one particular team that did not understand how to use queues. And I went into their environment and they had like 150,000 queues running. And I was like, why do you have
one message each?
Yeah, I was like, why do you have so many queues? And they were like, one per customer. I'm like, that's not how that works. No, no.
Well, they should have. You should have sent them to speak to somebody British, because we are experts at queues.
That is true.
You know, we love to queue for things. Anyway. On that note, as regular listeners to the podcast will know, we're not here to talk about martial arts, DIY, or security, although actually this week we have a lot of very security-focused articles. We are here, of course, to talk about AWS news. So once a week, I curate a list of AWS news, which I share via my weekly AWS News Roundup newsletter. And then John picks a selection of the articles that we'd like to talk about with our guest. So as I mentioned, we've got quite a lot of security-focused or related articles this week, but with an AWS slant. The first of those is an article on the AWS security blog, and the title is Beyond IAM Access Keys, Modern Authentication Approaches for AWS. So, John, what was it that piqued your interest on this particular article?
Piquing interest is an interesting turn of phrase, because it's all really dreary, but I thought it was worth picking up on. It's interesting that they call this a 200 level thing, because I thought this was all basics, but okay. This is one of those, we kind of live and breathe this ecosystem. We exist in it every day. I mean, you probably don't, Carl, because you're a GUI user and you don't use access keys for things. But
I wear the swag, so you know, I'm inside AWS every day.
Oh gosh, that's
a disturbing thought.
I do change the t-shirts, so yeah.
You've got several of them.
Yeah, lots of them. Yeah.
All the same. Yeah, but you know, for those of us that actually do the engineering side of things, we live and breathe this every day. So this is pretty kind of normal stuff for us, but I think worth going over, because you know it's worth touching on these things every so often. The old-fashioned way of accessing AWS, and I say old-fashioned, okay, AWS is only 17 years old, but the old-fashioned way of accessing things within AWS was an IAM user. And you're not recommended to use these anymore because you've got long-lived keys, long-lived credentials, long-lived passwords, all that kind of thing. And generally it's a bad idea. But that's what you used to do. And if you needed programmatic access, you generated an access key, and that had a secret key associated with it, right? Which was this big, ugly hex string. And they lasted until you turned them off, because it worked like a username and a password, but it was just another one for you, effectively. That's how they work. They're more like API keys than anything else. That's kind of the old-fashioned way of doing things now. You're not recommended to do that, and it doesn't play particularly nicely in a world of multi-account organizations anyway, because you end up having to jump through lots of roles to kind of get where you're going to. So they're not recommended anymore. And there's lots of other and better ways of doing things, and this article lists a few of them. Not all of them, but a few of them. The first one I'm a big fan of, because it says, for CLI access, use CloudTrail, which is, yes, just spot on, absolutely do that. If you don't need lots of things in your local environment to be up and down, i.e. if you're not deploying things like Terraform or CloudFormation or whatever from your local machine, and you shouldn't be, CloudTrail covers your requirement for CLI access pretty nicely, right? It's pre-built, it's pre-authed, you don't have to worry about passing in profiles and authing yourself and all the rest of it. You log into the console, however you happen to do that, hit CloudTrail, and you're in and you're away. You think, well, what about this, that, or the other tool? It's a Python environment, and I think it's actually baked on top of a version of Amazon Linux, so you can just do a yum install or whatever it is and get the tool that you need. But most of the tools that you're going to want to kind of play with the outputs from the console, from the CLI, sorry, are going to be there already. Like JQ's already installed, Python's already there. It's these sorts of things you're going to want. They're already there, and it's semi-persistent. So it's not, your access keys aren't persistent, but if you keep logging in and keep using it, your data stays there. So it's persistent to a point. If you don't log into it for, I think, 3 months or something like that, they email you and tell you they're going to close you down in about a month's time. And I think that's reasonable. But yes, that one, absolutely do that. It goes on with Identity Center, formerly known as SSO. It's one of these just disgustingly big name things because it was called one thing, now it's called something else, but the permissions are still the old thing. So if you want to grant people permissions to do anything with Identity Center, it's still SSO or SSO directory, which just helps massively. But again, CLI v2 and IDC, okay, yeah, if you do need to be moving things from your local up to the cloud, then that's the best way of doing it. And I'm a big fan of taking it a little bit further and using a particular tool called Granted, granted.dev, and that just makes all of that a lot nicer. Others exist. There's now one I'm aware of called Leap, and I'm sure there's several others, but that's good like that. I don't really use IDE integration because I don't do that sort of work, but that's a thing you can do as well. And again, it's using OAuth and that kind of thing. And it goes on a little bit further as well and talks about the principle of least privilege. And there's a couple of scenarios as well where you might still have to use an access key, and they are very keen on making sure that you're not doing it. So for things like third-party applications, if you're hosting it on a server, use an instance profile. Don't bake keys into servers. That's a bad idea. If it's a SaaS tool and that's the only way they're giving you to get in, then it's okay. You have to live with it, but maybe see if you can find a different tool that plays a bit nicer with modern standards. And then it talks about OIDC as well. And I'm a big fan of that because again, that's temporary creds. You don't really have to worry about how you're authing because it's come from this repo in this organization, it's on that branch, and it's only touching this role. Bang, bang, bang. I'm in. Brilliant. That just makes life a whole lot easier because it's not another secret that you have to look after. But yeah, it's worth a look if you're thinking, I've been using this IAM user for a while, or I'm a bit bored of having to rotate my keys. There's a better way. Go do it better.
What are your thoughts on this, Peter? Because obviously getting this right is incredibly important. Getting this wrong becomes a fairly major kind of attack vector for people to get into AWS. So what are your thoughts here?
I have some pretty spicy opinions, to be honest, for a very, as John put it, dreary kind of potentially read of an article. First of all, temporary credentials are the way to go. I think what's interesting to me, and this is one of the bones I'll pick with AWS, and I've picked it with folks at EBCs and things like that. Listen, we should be using temporary credentials. IAM has become this kind of archaic, bolted on, overly complex to deal with system. And the reality is most people who go and use AWS in an organization, especially a large organization, they're not like John, they're not like you, they're not like me. They're not folks who have been using the cloud forever. They're not expert. So they're going to go to the path of least resistance, right? They're going to use an IAM user. They're going to use an access key. They're not going to use roles. They're not going to use short-lived credentials. And there's in my sense, like, this article is great. It's helpful. But even if you go through the steps in here, aside from CloudTrail, which is probably, although in John's example, I actually agree with him, and I think it would be useful to use it that way. But in most cases, I actually think people try to use CloudTrail as they would completely use the normal command line. They don't really understand what it is, and then they start putting things at risk because they start trying to do things in it that they shouldn't, and then it's in the browser. Browsers are not necessarily the cleanest and most secure thing on your system compared to your actual command line. But generally speaking, most users, if they want to go use any of the methods that are in that article, they're going to have to go do further research to figure out how to do it. But if I want to go get something working, I can go pull an IAM user, pull an access token, and I can be up and running in 30 seconds. So I think that it's great that we're publishing articles like this, but I would say that we really want to reduce kind of the barrier of complexity. And this is something that I think is really rife across, especially AWS, but all kind of cloud providers. I think IAM has, in an effort to become so granular, it's become so complex that it's not very manageable. And we don't necessarily need more methodologies. What we need is simple and precise methodologies. As John noted, everything in there says least privilege and temporary credentials. The question is, why is there an option in AWS then that is not that?
So that's a call to the cloud providers to simplify this on behalf of the users of cloud and stop letting us do things that we shouldn't be doing, I guess.
Yeah. And I think there's the argument's always that there's legacy. And my argument would be like, yeah, but that's kind of the point of the cloud, is to not have legacy, right? Like, we moved all the legacy architecture to the cloud so that we wouldn't have legacy architecture. And now the argument from cloud providers is, but the legacy, and it's like, you got to pick a side.
Cloud is now old enough to have legacy, I guess.
Yeah.
So. Yeah. Okay, well, on that note, let's move along to our second article for this week. And this is another article from the AWS Security blog. We didn't do this on purpose because Peter is a CISO. Honestly, these were all genuinely in the newsletter last week. So this is another article from the Security blog. The title is Introducing SRA Verify, an AWS Security Reference Architecture Assessment Tool. So, John, shall I go with the peaking of interest, or should I? Do I think you might be excited about this one?
I'm excited about, going to the pub, that sort of thing. I don't get excited about security reference architectures, if I'm really honest. This is, I don't know, it's interesting, if you like. So SRA was a new one on me. We do quite a bit with security services anyway, right? It's just something that we've built into our own landing zone product. We've just kind of used these tools. We've used GuardDuty and Inspector and all these sorts of things that you'd expect to use. As you'd expect, it just has a reference architecture, and I've been clicking kind of through the options, and it's like, we're kind of rebuilding our landing zone product at the minute, and I'm like, this saves me so much work. This is brilliant because there's so much in there that I don't have to do, which is great. So for the uninitiated, the security reference architecture sits within the AWS samples world in their GitHub, right? So it's one of those production ready, but like kinda, sort of. It's a sample, you can take it and extend it and all the rest of it, but it's like MIT licensed, and AWS are going to sort of do this with it quite a lot. What it is it's giving you a way of deploying security tools, and that's your GuardDuties, that's your Macy's, that's your Inspector, that's what else is in that list. If you go and look at the GitHub, I'm sure you recognize the logos better than I would, Carl. But that's, all those sorts of security tools that you'd expect to see. And there's a way of kind of doing a standard deployment for those. And if you've got Control Tower, it'll do it within customizations for Control Tower. If you're using stack sets, there's stack sets for it. If you're not using those things, there's just a stack set. If you're using Terraform, then there's Terraform for it. If you're using Account Factory for Terraform, you can do it that way, and so on and so on. Yeah, so there's just lots of different ways of deploying these security tools that you should be using. And here's an easy way of doing it. Wonderful. And there's even an easy setup way within AWS organizations. So it's just push button, get security tools. Great. Spend some money. Less great. What SRA Verify is doing is it's a holistic set of guidelines for deploying the full... it directly maps these recommendations to automated checks. So I'm assuming that's using config, which is the tool that nobody asked for, but everybody has to pay for, which is great. But it's worth doing, right? Because if you need to know that you're compliant with this, that, or the other, it's a thing to go and look at. So go read that, go dig into the SRA side of things, and the service it talks about, CloudTrail, GuardDuty, Access Analyzer, Config, Security Hub, blah, 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 blah. So if it's got security even vaguely in it, this is interesting to you. And as I say, this is not groundbreaking. It's an assessment tool. It's the sort of thing that I'd expect to see well-architected reviews starting to use, because there's a big push, I think, for automation just in everything from AWS, and the more you can automate, the better. So go read, go have a look, and if it's something that you need to care about, it is something you need to care about, go read it a second time.
Yeah, well architected was on the tip of my tongue as well when looking at this as another automation that could be run to see how well things are deployed. What about yourself, Peter? Is SRA, was it a new one on you, or something you're familiar with?
It's something I'm roughly familiar with. Similar to landing zones, like John said, and I think that I think it's really good for companies that are kind of new and building in the cloud for the first time. Having said that, I also, it's an interesting dichotomy always for me that companies that are born in the cloud are still born to go fast, and they look at security as something that slows them down. And so they don't pull something like SRA to build off of. Instead, they kind of just start building, and then security becomes an afterthought when things start going wrong. So I think there's something to it. I think the verifier is like interesting-ish. I also think though that a lot of auditors and a lot of companies are already doing continuous config checks. There's other competing companies out there. There's Prowler and Net and Scout Suite are automatically running under the hood in a lot of companies. So I think there's SRA itself, I think, is more exciting, and being able to look at the well-architected. I question how much the Verify tool is really going to bring to bear to the market versus, again, making some of this happen by default, right? And I think the argument there is, and this goes back to like Watchtower and landing zones, the argument was always like, well, yes, but what if a company doesn't want security? And it's like, that doesn't make sense, right? Like it doesn't, like, well, security costs money. Well, yes, but there's a lot of other things in the cloud that cost money that you have absolutely no problem automatically charging folks for in AWS. And so I think it's something where, to some extent, what I would love to see with something like SRA and SRA Verify, if I could opine, would be something akin to like, we might need to start looking at what it looks like to have kind of like cloud playground pricing versus like cloud enterprise pricing, where it's like, if you are actually legitimately running this for a production business, like we're going to require you to be on enterprise pricing, and we're going to give you basic security as part of that. And this, like, if you want to use it for non-production things, fine over here, but production things get the basics built in, right? Because at some point we have to kind of, draw a line, right, where we say we're not going to let you to continue to build things we know are insecure and put people's data into it, right? And I think cloud providers are a perfect place to do that. I would say AWS especially, but cloud providers have much more influence over what occurs within companies' infrastructure and engineering departments than pretty much any force in the world at this point. Maybe the browser companies, that's about it.
So cloud providers should mandate security services. That's what I'm hearing there.
I think it's mandate, I think, is strong. I think include as part of the product. Yes. I think it should be there, right? Like, and so you've seen some of this changing, right? Like, I remember coming up in the days, CloudTrail was not on by default. CloudTrail is now on by default in accounts, right? That was a change that was made. Why was it ever not on by default? That's the question, right?
And the whole public bucket thing, the changes that have happened there.
Yeah, right. Like there's just
it's coming, but
yeah. So I think there's other simple changes we can make, and I think there's definitely scale economics at play there that can help.
Cool. Okay, on that note, let's move on to our third article for this week. This is a Forrester article, and it's the first article this week about AI. So we've got 3 articles into the 2 articles in before talking about AI. But we're not really going to talk about AI specifically. We're going to talk about MCP, which is a new thing that has just exploded onto the scene recently and caught us all off guard because nobody really knows what it is, but everybody's talking about it. And that in itself becomes a challenge for people like yourself, Peter, in terms of this new thing that everybody's talking about and wants to use. What is it, what does it mean for security? So the title of the article is MCP doesn't stand for many critical problems, but maybe it should for CISOs. And obviously we know that MCP does stand for Model Context Protocol. But Peter, I'm going to come to you first on this one, being a CISO. What are your thoughts around this? Had you had thoughts around this prior to reading the article? Has the article kind of made you go, oh, this is something I want to be thinking about? Or where are you kind of at on this?
I think many CISOs are already in that position, right? Like MCP was something that literally I remember having conversations in January early on with some folks, and it was barely a blip on the radar. And I was having calls literally 2 weeks ago trying to find security products and ways to kind of insulate some of the issues that are being covered in this article. I do think though that this article has kind of a very basic understanding of how MCP is really being used in most companies. And I think that while it is being used and explored in companies and in a number of different novel ways, I think that actually it's new, right? It is new. And I think a lot of people have it in, it's interesting to me. AI, when it's chat GPT is okay. AI, when it's touching all of your data, people actually tend to have a little bit of an inherent fear of, which I think is good because internet, SaaS, everything else, fear does not exist. Trust everything. AI, for some reason, maybe it was the Terminator movies. People are, I don't, maybe we'll go slow here. And so I think that's good. I do think that the article kind of argues that it's going to really slow things down and reduce scale and kind of make things impossible. And it's like, I think we're way too early to say that adding security and scoping into how we use MCP is really going to significantly create a drag. And as a matter of fact, most of the MCP usage I've seen has been at least minimally scoped to basically use, to our earlier conversation, temporary credentialing and credentialing that is essentially the same as what that user would have had anyway, in the way that the MCP is being utilized to bring data to that user or allow that data to interact. So most of the attack vectors that have been kind of newsy about the MCPs have been more on the side of like dev plugins and things like that, where permissioning is much more esoteric. You haven't really heard tremendous news stories about MCPs allowing being used to Chase Bank and allowing someone to get all the data. I don't even know that Chase Bank is using MCPs. I'm just using it as an example, right? Don't come after me, Chase.
Don't chase you.
Don't chase me. But my point being, like, there is no. I think that's still very much in an experimental phase, and I think that that's running very slowly and cautiously. And again, I think people are actually taking a security first view there. I think the idea that MCPs are running around in companies having unfettered access to data is not happening. And I think people saying like, oh, if we give it restrictions, it's going to slow things down. I think people are just there like, this can actually do this, right? Like, so we're at that early adoption phase. I don't think people are concerned with speed and optimization yet.
I guess the big newsy risk has not been exposed yet. So the attack hasn't happened, or the breach has not occurred.
I think it needs to be out there to have it happen, right? I think it's a concern, but I think right now, like from the CISO seat, the biggest concern is really more about like data leakage and internal misconfiguration, and less about the actual kind of scoping and bounding of the MCPs, because it's so early in development still that it's just not that we haven't met that threshold yet. We're still talking internal concerns of what does it mean to even have this in our environment.
John, anything to add on this one?
None of the problems that I think we're seeing thus far with MCPs, because they're not magic. It's just here's how one agent talks to another. They're not magic. None of these things are new, right? Trend Micro, according to the article, discovered nearly 500 and Gnostic AI found over 1,800 MCP servers exposed to the internet. Don't do that.
Right. That's like,
this is not new. And to the point earlier we made about unsecured S3 buckets, they make exactly that same parallel in the article. It's just don't do that thing.
Mm-hmm.
The other thing that I suppose is concerning, because again, this isn't new, but there's some fun attack vectors that I hadn't considered before. Things like context poisoning, which is the best term ever. It's just the best names in these things. It's, we're going to change how your context works so that everything that isn't constantly being validated and verified and all the rest of it just gets bad context from now on. And okay, cool. Just don't put these things on the internet. Start there.
Yep. And precisely the point of like, some of the other security I've seen around it, if you're scoping it to what a user can already do, great, poison the context. Okay, well, the user can only get access to the data the user could get access to. So I don't know what you've poisoned in there, but if you're telling them show everything, okay, you're showing everything that the user could already get via an API or some other avenue, right? So again, it's really just how the agents are talking to each other, right? And so you're just allowing that agent to have that same context. It's where you're not doing your basic security hygiene, where these things are really falling apart early. And so I think do your basic security hygiene. And then I think I think there's more here. I think there are companies in this space that are evolving that will plug a lot of these holes. But I think for now, it's really just basic security hygiene is going to cover most of the problems.
Cool.
Yeah.
On that note, let's move along to our fourth article for this week. And we're back on the AWS security blog. Yes, definitely the blog, with five facts about how the Cloud Act actually works. And this is a wonderful acronym. It stands for Clarifying the Lawful Overseas Use of Data Act, which is a US law passed in 2018. So, Peter, because you are a US citizen, at least I assume you're a US citizen. I know you're based in the US. This is probably more familiar to you than it is to us. So what are your thoughts around this? I think this article is aiming to debunk some myths about the Cloud Act.
I think debunk is like the biggest thing, right? I think, look, I think there is a nature to think that people are, especially governments, are always trying to kind of get at data. The reality is, having worked with the government in the past on different things, getting data is really hard. And AWS, amongst all the cloud providers, telecoms, et cetera, they all kind of robustly make it difficult to get at data and protect the privacy, at least the US and European based ones I'm familiar with, of their customers. I can't speak globally. Things are different in different parts of the world. I think we all know that. But this also really didn't change much, right? Many of the kind of reciprocal nature was an odd phrase. A lot of what's in the Cloud Act kind of already existed in one way or another, right? So either there were reciprocal laws in other countries that did similar things. There were policies from the providers, including AWS, that did similar things. And essentially, really what it just does is it strengthens that anything that does any business in the US is subject to this. And therefore, we are going to ask to get data if we think there is a crime that has been committed. That's going to be the number one reason, or a terrorist activity, some sort of administrative subpoena. And we're going to request that data. The reality is, most of the time, the cloud providers can't provide that data. So it has to go to the companies anyway. The best thing that may occur as a result of those is if the cloud provider doesn't have access to the data, which they often don't, is they might shut it down or stop it or isolate it so that other investigation can be done. But this isn't something that's particularly novel, right? This has been going on around the world. The UK, to your point of being non-US citizens over there, has equivalent laws that exist, and so do many other countries. And I think the unfortunate thing too that people tend to over-rotate on with these laws is most often than not, the things that are actually being gone after when you're going after a subpoena with a company like AWS, there's something pretty egregious going on. And so in my experience, we're talking about, if you can think about like the most despicable things that can occur in the world, things that universally people agree should not be happening in the world, anywhere in the world, that's usually the things that are being pursued when you're going that deep with this kind of things, because most law enforcement knows what they're going to get access to or get response from or not, So they're not going to pursue things like this unless they feel it is absolutely necessary. So this idea that they're running around just grabbing everyone's data, one, they don't have time for that, and two, it's not going to work out most of the time. So they're only going to usually try this when it's absolutely things that are egregious. Sure, I'm sure there could be some random sparse occasions, and where any power can be abused, but that's not really why this is set up. And what they're trying to do is deal with like really terrible things related to like terrorism, human trafficking, large ransomware campaigns, things that really generally affect everyone. And most people are like, yeah, we should probably not be doing that in the world. It's like, most people are not pro human trafficking. So it's like, things like that.
Apart from the human traffickers, I guess.
Well, yes. So a small minority that we probably, don't really want to be the fan base here anyway. So.
John, thoughts on this one?
I love the acronyms that American laws come up with because we don't do that in the UK. We don't have
GDPR. Well, that's EU, isn't it?
That's the
GDPR
EU.
is nowhere near as catchy as
It's,
cloud.
no, exactly. That's just 4 letters. It's not. This is one of those forced acronyms. They wanted it to say
really
cloud.
How badly we force some of these acronyms in the US. Like some of these laws have names that are like a paragraph long just so you can get some nice acronym. Real bad.
I do love an acronym.
Oh, dear.
I do love an acronym.
Yes, I know you do. This is not a new act, right? It was
2018.
Yeah, so this is not new. This is 7 years old. I think this has come round for a couple of reasons. The EU sovereign cloud thing, I don't think it's related, if I'm honest, but try telling a regulator, try telling like a data controller that's part-time and does it 1 day a week for 5 companies. Like try telling them that's not related. Cool. American politics is a lot less stable, for the nicest way I can put that, than it used to be. And that makes overseas data folks worried about it because it used to be this sort of reasonable bastion of stability, and it's not that anymore. I mean, to be fair, no politics is as stable as it was 10 years ago, right? Even I was reading about Japanese elections recently, and they're even having it, and they've had the same ruling party more or less since 1955, and now they're having a populism issue. So it's okay, the world is just less stable than it used to be. So that's not an America exclusive issue, but given that all 3 big hyperscale providers and lots of the smaller ones are based in the States, people get worried about American law changes. Cool. And if you do a bit of digging around on Wikipedia, they do say that the German federal police were particularly worried about this one, which is a really weird set of people to be concerned about it, but okay. But yeah, this is nothing new, so interesting. And they've put this out, I think, because people are just worried about it again, because, like I say, sovereign cloud and access to data and kind of all the rest of it. But there's nothing new. But what I think is very telling is quite how keen AWS are at putting this out there. They don't often do this. They've written this article in English and French and German.
Well, there you go. That tells you where it's coming from then, doesn't it? Yeah. Who the interested parties are. Yeah. So, but for me, fact 5 was, the most interesting, that if you do things properly, they can't get your data anyway. Only you can. So, use the tools that we give you to secure and encrypt your data properly. And then the only person that can get access to your data is you. So if someone's coming looking for it, they're going to have to ask you.
I always encourage folks when I'm dealing with auditors and folks at other banks who are more naive about, and other, high security institutions I've dealt with in my career who are naive about cloud security. I often offer to give them the white paper AWS publishes annually on their like data center security and how everything is actually built and set up. And if you read that paper, I think it would be easier to try to strike some like government and intelligence institutions around the world than get into like an AWS data center and breach their data. Like, it is ridiculous the planning and level of security that goes into AWS and really the way that they treat their customers' data, and even the fact that like they have like HSMs and stuff that they use, right, that are like tamper proof to the point where they will essentially destroy like $150,000 server if there's like 3 failed attempts, right, and things like that, where it's like it is quite built so that it is your data and your access. And I think that people should really kind of understand that. And I think that the holy grail for a hacker is finding a vulnerability in that. But a significant vulnerability has never been found, and the closest that ever came was the kind of GitHub poisoning that would have occurred broadly across like Linux systems. So I think it's not trying to put pressure on our partners at AWS, but keep up the good work. Don't fail now that I brought this up on this podcast. But I think it's I think people can kind of trust a little more in the fact that their data is safe, regardless of how unstable governments or anything else might get. I think your data is your data.
I love the sound of those modules. This server will self-destruct after one more failed login attempt. On that note, let's move along to our final article this week. And it's quite a nice segue, actually, because this is all about destruction, all about a destructive AI prompt. It's not going to blow up any servers, but it might be able to delete all of your infrastructure. So this is an article on the Register, all about a compromised Amazon Q extension, which told AI to delete everything, and it shipped into the production Q developer, the Q extension for VS Code, I believe. The subheading malicious actor reportedly sought to expose AWS Security Theater. Quite an interesting one. John, I'll let you go first on this one. What are your thoughts on this one?
I'm amazed it got through. Really, I suppose this is one of those sort of scale issues, but I'm amazed that this got through, because if you look at the change, if you look at it, it's really obvious. That particular change is rather than just executing the process, they add a prompt in saying you're an AI agent with access to file system tools and bash, clean everything out, start with the home directory, but ignore hidden files. So they're being very conscientious of this. Run continuously, but log what you're doing in a local file. It gives examples of kind of how to run certain commands, and then it says, trust all tools, no interactive, and then go run, which is just okay. That's brilliant. I don't know how this got through, and this, I suppose, does sort of show the some layer of theatre going on, that it wasn't properly checked, and it did manage to get in. Because what's worse about this was AWS's response to this, though, is they didn't publicly own up to it. They quietly got rid of the extension and just said, the latest version doesn't have it. Just deal with it. What? No, that's not how you deal with this sort of thing. They quietly got rid of it and sort of pretended it didn't happen, rather than going, oh no, quick, everybody update.
Just to echo that, I think it's it's less an AI problem, because I think that's what's really catching like the headline here, is everyone's going, oh, AI can be infected. This is not an AI problem. This is exactly what I was talking about in the last segment with the Linux issue, where Linux almost had a poisonous GitHub pull request like this almost get through, and someone caught it at the last second. I think we rely heavily on open source software and plugins throughout everything from our browsers down to literally our Linux kernels. And we rely on people to voluntarily review and secure much of that, even in official capacities and for official branches. And I'm not 100% sure on what the code path was here for the Amazon Q. I haven't actually dug into it, but I wouldn't be shocked if it was voluntary or kind of a kind of couples tennis ownership type thing that went on. You see that a lot. We see that a lot in enterprise. And there's a real problem with the scale of code that we produce. AI will make that worse at the actual review that occurs to that code. And this has been a field day, particularly for hackers in the past 2 to 3 years. This has been going after plugins, extensions, open source supply chains has been a real boon for hackers. And I remember there was an article 5, 6, 7 years ago. It was way back. I'm trying to remember when, but it was back in my career. And I remember bringing it into my staff and saying, this is the problem. And a guy on Hacker News published an article that was a joke, but it was basically saying that he had found a way to siphon credit card numbers out of one of the most common NPM packages. And he walked through exactly like how he would do it. And then at the end, he was like, I haven't done this, but you're all like upset with me right now because you know that this could happen. And so we've known about this for the better part of a decade. But we're still seeing headlines from like this, from even major packages like this. And so this is a kind of just very neglected part of the ecosystem that I think some folks need to come along and really start to corner away, or the ecosystems themselves need to start picking up the slack, right? And they need to start finding a way to do a better job at managing this. And quite precisely, you often see too that sometimes they know they'll get reports, they know it's bad, they don't take it down. At least it was like replaced and taken down in this case. And sometimes you see legitimate packages get taken over. There's all kinds of vectors here. So I think it's something that should be alarming to folks. But I really think that the audience needs to realize this is not an AI problem. This is a supply chain open source ownership problem. And I think if you're listening to this podcast, go volunteer for an open source project, see the volume of pull requests that come in, see the volume of not good pull requests that come in. And then also go look at the number of open source packages out there that are maintained by like 4 people, but used by like 450,000 people, right? And you're like, oh.
I think the curl package is maintained by a guy or something ridiculous.
And so I think, again, it's a solvable problem, but I'm not quite sure we know what the solution is.
I know what the solution is. Pay people to look after these things.
I mean, well, but that raises the question of will companies be willing to pay for open source software?
Well, that's what the open source community has been banging on about for years. It was, take me seriously, please use me.
Yes.
That last thing has sort of not happened.
Yep. Yeah. And that's, well, because I think that, what's interesting is I actually think that if I had to pay a couple of cents for every extension or every open source thing that's downloaded by NPM, a company would probably pay for it, and it's a rounding error. I think that often when you see these like now pay for it, it's like, okay, you've been using this open source thing for free. Now pay me hundreds of thousands of dollars a year to use this. And you see that sometimes with companies where they spin up their own company. And I think if it's a big enough tool, sure. But a lot of times, a lot of these little building blocks are just not at that value prop. So the question is, how do you kind of scale that out, right? Again, I think it's solvable. And I think, again, look, being a CISO, no good crisis should go to waste, right? And so like, maybe the fact that this hit Amazon and Amazon's getting some bad press, again, Amazon being in a position of scale, maybe AWS helps to do something about this, right? Maybe they start a trend. It's possible. I don't know if it's likely, but it's possible. So.
Well, let's wait and see. My favorite part of this article, by the way, was just the file name for the image of the prompt. I don't know if you guys noticed that, but if you click on it, you'll see it's called evilprompt.jpg.
Yep.
So
it was real obviously bad.
But on that note, on the subject of the evil prompt, we have used all of our time for season 4, episode 30 of Logicast. So if you are still listening, thank you very much for joining us. If you enjoyed it, please do tell your friends and your colleagues. We are available to download from wherever you download your podcasts. And if you'd like to see John's change of scenery this week, we are also available to watch on our YouTube channel, on the Logicata YouTube channel. So thank you, John, as always, the karate legend. I hadn't realized that your interest in martial arts had extended as far as Japanese politics as well. So that was an interesting revelation in today's episode. And thank you, Peter Van Iperen, for being today's guest. It's been really great to hear your insights around the world of AWS and the world of security. So we will be back next week with another episode of Logicast for you. Until then, thank you very much for listening, and we'll see you again next time.